Okay, well, hello. This is Elizabeth Stein of Belly and Body Care with Stephanie Kohler as the guest today on this lovely topic of self-love. And Stephanie, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Stephanie. As we've all heard a few times already, I run a company called Sidereal Alchemy, and it's all about bringing cosmic consciousness into practical life and sort of bridging spirit and matter. So I work with people one on one, I teach classes, and do all things intuitive.
And Stephanie, I just wanted to mention, is a really long time friend. Like, how long have we known each other, Stephanie, would you say? I mean, at least 9 years. I mean,
I
at
was
least.
thinking like a solid 10 plus.
Okay, yeah, that feels
Like,
right.
because I met you and a lot of people like right around the time I turned 30. So it's like a
Okay.
very easy like marker for me in terms of like when I got looped into certain people. So
Yeah, and we've just kind of stuck together. We're both
I know. It's so
we
sweet.
it
Moving
is.
across continents and like going in all these weird places, random directions, and then like still circling back.
Yeah, but we're always like international because you spent time in Japan.
Hmm.
Yeah, I spent time in New Zealand and Australia. And but we're both very conscious oriented, kind of like goddess, kind of priestess, artsy.
Aiming to be, yes,
Yes, yeah.
aspirationally, at least for me. You're already there. You're good.
What? No, you're that too. Just a mirror.
Listen, just stand in humility here. Always learning.
Yes, always. So, on that note, I'm so thrilled that you decided that you felt called when I put the kind of the post out there, like who wanted to be interviewed on this topic that's personally really near and dear to my own heart. It's definitely been a journey, and I think, they're like these themes. I think that you like people come in with and they just sort of stick with you the rest of your life. Like for me, self love is like one of those like lifelong learnings, one of those themes that I know until the day I leave the planet, I will like be deepening and ripening into. And so,
Good.
and I suspect you're on a very similar trajectory, having known
Yeah.
you for years. And on that, I love to ask the question, what does self-love mean to you? And I know it's a huge, broad question, but whatever comes up, whatever
Right.
you'd like to share.
Yeah, I mean, for me, self-love really is for me what it makes me think of in terms of definitions is just however I define love, right? And then directing that towards self. So there's not for me a big distinction of like self-love versus love. It's that self-love is an aspect of love, right?
Mm,
So when I think about defining love, I define it as ultimately what I think is our natural state of being, but really this state of unconditionality, right? Of recognizing people for who they are, allowing their imperfections, being in a place of compassion and of acceptance and of forgiveness and of appreciation, right? Like all of the things I think that love encompasses, self-love then is directing that towards myself.
so it's like a form of radical self-acceptance.
Yeah, I mean, and depending on how you define radical, right? If you think of radical as like a fundamental form of self-acceptance, yes. And then in the sense of radical is like, oh my gosh, it's new and extreme. Like ultimately, I think it's not actually. It's something that we've many of us have become disconnected from, but it's not something that's like newfangled. It's something that actually is very ancient, and something we can return to for me.
I love how you like that for you that what I'm hearing is that there's no distinction between love and self-love. Like that just is such a beautiful kind of like coming together and merging. Cause it's like, maybe it's like a Western society thing where we kind of like separate things out so much and
We
tweeze it out.
do.
Yeah.
That
It's
Western
a,
mind.
we gotta label
It's
it now.
something. Yeah.
Category
Yeah.
box.
And there's so much disconnect, I think, in so many Western attitudes. And it's helpful at times, right? To be able to sort of pull things a little independently and look at things in separation, right? Ultimately can lead, for me, can often lead to greater understanding when I can isolate certain things at times and see them in a certain context. But I mean, ultimately, I believe in connection. So so there is no distinction, right? If I'm just looking at love in general, then I'm just part of this greater context. And so for me, it doesn't serve to have a separate definition of self-love that is entirely distinct from how I see love in general.
I love that. That's just so beautiful.
Thanks.
I I want to ask you a personal question. So
Okay.
yeah, you can decline. But
Okay.
sorry, it's
Thank
like
you.
what is she gonna ask? It's like, so your journey, would you define yourself as someone that's always had self-love or access to that kind of that one love consciousness?
Yes, I think I've always recognized it, but also I was sort of denied that agency and denied it in the sense of other people invalidating, I guess is a better way to describe it. I think I had that perspective so invalidated either kind of implicitly in the world that I grew up in and in the world that we live in oftentimes. And then sometimes explicitly, like I learned at a very young age, like I said things that would freak adults out. Um, and it just kind of shut me down at a very young age for a long time of like, oh, I shouldn't say things that come to mind because people look at me like I'm mental and I get in trouble or I'm bad or I'm criticized. And so I think there's a part of me that's been aware of this and then a part of me that also sort of invalidated myself for a long time. And I think really as an adult what I'm grateful for is the capacity to come back to those things and dive into them more deeply and find teachers and mentors and guides who do support that and who help me deepen my own understanding.
So it's like that coming back to your own authenticity, integrity,
Yeah.
your truth, and
Yeah,
not
and I
being,
think that's common for a lot of us, kind of
yeah,
disengaging from a lot of the really toxic beliefs that we've been conditioned into, right?
that's very true. That could be a whole other topic.
Right. I mean, that's like independent, like that's self-love and a gazillion other things, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say? So what I'm understanding is that you've always had like kind of this understanding and this innate connection, got disconnected because of the programming and the other people's beliefs. So how did you begin to like bridge that back within yourself, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
that's a great question. I think
Mhm.
really it came about from having, being fortunate enough to have access to teachers or belief systems that were not, the Christian capitalist Western programming that I was mostly surrounded by. Um, when I was in college, I studied Buddhism, like as a class. Like we practiced and we meditated and we sort of learned about it. But like at the time, there was not really an internet. And um, so it only went so far. But it was the first time that I was really exposed to like utterly different teachings about the mind and consciousness and emotions and all these things. So it was really my first glimpse into understanding there are totally different paradigms and totally different ways of engaging with our existence as people, right? And then I think, after that, I lived in Japan, which is a very different cultural understanding about all these things. And then when I moved back to the US, it was just kind of continuing that trajectory. And I'm just a very curious person. I would describe myself as a spiritual mutt. So like I'm interested in what anybody is willing to share. And I don't consider myself a particular like practitioner in, really lining up with a particular system so much as welcoming all of it, and being, finding wisdom everywhere, right? And so, learning from Hindu teachers, learning from um, Buddhist teachers, like just even now I have some friends who are like, well, I have a friend who's a rabbi, and it's fascinating the things that she teaches me, right? And it's not because I'm Jewish and I identify that way, um, but yeah, being open to new ideas.
Hmm. And and then have you noticed like a difference in like your life, like before, and then after?
Yeah. That's the
Would you
short
mind?
answer. Do you want examples or what do you?
Well, what is like the biggest, like what are the biggest differences that you've noticed?
I think, gosh, it's so hard to pick just a few things. I mean, the broadest thing I would say is that I'm comfortable with being myself, and I don't feel apologetic, and I don't feel less than. Like I can get caught up in those loops sometimes, right? Like I'm not perfect, I'm not a robot, but I don't, I think that so many of us get pulled into like ruminations about how we're not enough, and we get like, we just like burn energy and time and all the things on just like worthless chasing, right? Whether it's about your appearance or about your job or about your relationships or whatever it is. um I think that I'm someone who's mostly done that. Like I don't look back on my life and think like, gosh, I wasted 15 years chasing a career that I don't want or whatever. But I do look at how apologetic I was to kind of the world in general, right? Like the people judging me, whether I knew them or whether they were just imaginary people, right? Um, I spent a lot of years feeling apologetic about living a life I wanted that was really authentic to me. And that still burns a lot of energy. like, like even without chasing a bunch of things that ultimately I didn't want, like just this like heaviness of feeling guilty about it or wishing I could be different, right? And I think what I've really come into now is just being very at ease with it. It's not because everybody will agree or everyone will appreciate it, but I don't have to get pulled into that at all, right? That's optional.
Sounds very free.
It is. It feels, at least for me, it does for me.
Yeah, those loops and like I mean I'm a woman and I identify as a woman, but like and I'm sure men and all the other gender
Yeah.
spectrums, also get stuck in their own versions of these like rumination loops. But yeah, and like when I think back to my 20s, like the things I used to worry about and put energy into, and it's just like, oh my goodness, I wish I was focusing on other things,
Yeah.
at this life. So yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's a big one for most people.
Mhm.
Um, so it sounds like for you, like your journey is really, about like coming back to your own like personal integrity and really like validating and honoring your own truth, your own inner world, and just being okay. Like I find like when like I know for myself when I can come from that space, it's so much easier to be with however others are around me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And really, I think the way you phrase that for me also kind of captures what I was saying before about that love is this all encompassing thing, and seeing all things as being connected, that the more I am at ease with myself, the more I'm at ease with everybody, right? Like I'm not getting so wound up about people, making different choices, and I don't get pulled into other people's judgments if they have them about me, right? It's like I just can just have ease with all of it. And it's not so much of like, here I am, I'm in the love zone, and like, you over there, you're bad, or you're not as good. Like I just don't get pulled into it in any capacity, or I try not to be. Again, not perfect. Um, but like when I look back, right? If I look back at like my, especially growing up, but even in like my 20s, how easy it was because I was living much more in this paradigm of like, who you are isn't right. You need to be doing these other things. I thought it about me, and then I judged a gazillion other people for it too, right? that I think what we do in our inner world gets reflected out, and what we get conditioned to doing in the outer world gets then directed back at ourselves. Um, so yeah, for me, the ease goes in every direction, right? Um, and so I'm grateful to have that now.
Yeah, that piece. I know it's priceless, really.
Hmm.
Yeah. Are there any like, since sound like a bit of a veteran here, are there any put you on the spot. Are there any like tools or tricks that you found really helpful for your personal cultivation in this direction that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I would say tools, I would not call them like, and not to criticize how you see this, right? But just because I think language is an important part of how we come into healing and how we come into love, is like how we frame these things with language. So for myself, when I think about tricks, to me it implies like shortcuts or kind of quick little things. And for me, like self-love is not a shortcut thing. It's very much like this has just got to be how I live all the time. So not to like criticize how you see it, obviously, right? But also if I'm saying things that don't feel like quick grabs, it's because I never have really like leaned into it in that way, right? So just to clarify. Um,
Sure.
but I think for me, really one of the most powerful things, like what I was saying before, about really just being curious about other traditions and learning from teachers and all of that. But if I could pick one thing that I think is really transformative, it's loving kindness meditation and compassion meditation, because it really has, brought, it brings uncomfortable things up. And I think that that's a really important piece of self-love, is that for a lot of us, I think oftentimes people talk about self-love in the sort of ways of like the ways we see commodified self-care, right? Of like, it's bubble baths and flowers, and it's like, stuff, like physical stuff. And for me, the deepening of actual authentic real love and self-love has been through facing challenging things, has really been some of the most powerful work, facing the toxic conditioning that I grew up with, and sort of confronting my fears and my insecurities, and like doing things that in the moment are actually not always that fun. And I think if the mentality is self-love is easy, I just have to love myself, where is it? um, for me, it would never have gotten me to where I am now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I
So I
thought
think, oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you would, if you could share an example just to help other people that may not understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a really easy one that I think, I know that women get it in a certain way, but I also think everybody gets it in different ways. I just can only speak to my experience. Um, but how many people get conditioned to believe their bodies are like ugly and horrible, and like, and now I look at those attitudes and it's like, God, bodies are wonderful. Like they're amazing. And it doesn't matter like proportions and sizes and any of it, that I feel fortunate to be in a body that works pretty well most of the time. Um, so, but it took a lot to overcome that conditioning, right? And it still kind of, it doesn't feel like a lot of effort now, because I've really like created a life where I don't have, those sorts of presences in my like social media feeds, like I don't get pulled into that kind of stuff, but it's out there, right? And so it's taken for me this effort of facing those conditioned beliefs I had about myself, that like I was never going to be, that it was not okay for me to look the way I looked, that I needed to like make my body suffer to try to look a certain way. Like, I think that for me, that's been uncomfortable. And it's led to this really wonderful place, like a much better place that I'm in now. But it didn't come through like sitting back and like having a margarita on a Friday, in a bubble bath or something, like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it does.
so yeah, I think for me, it's very much about embracing challenges that are like the blocks that are in the way of self-love. Um, and that's been, so yeah. Is that a good
Yeah.
example?
Yeah. And I would actually say I relate quite strongly. It's been the real tough, real shitty times in life that have probably haven't all been like just, you know, knees on the gravel kind of experiences, but it's been those hard experiences, taking those, for me, honest, like real honest looks at myself, like, okay, what's my contribution? You know, how did I create this situation, and now what am I going to do about it? You know, like
Right.
taking ownership and like, okay, I want, it's
Oh,
like realizing you're in a boat and you're steering the boat but you weren't steering the boat, and it's like, oh, I'm in a boat and this is a steering wheel, like, oh, I should put my hands, I mean, it's so common sense, it's like, okay, wait, we want to go this way. You know?
yeah. I love it. I love it. And I think the responsibility piece for yourself, but I think also for me, that also makes me think about the accountability piece to others, you know, when I've made mistakes.
Yeah.
And I would love, you know, I obviously can't say I've always been good at it because I haven't been, you know, I've actually handled it quite badly. And it's something that I feel like the better I get at acknowledging when I've done wrong, acknowledging when I've done harm, even when it was unintentional, the easier it gets to just be in a space of greater love. Because again, like it's all connected. So when I'm able to be in that space with others, it's easier to reflect it back to myself. Um, so yeah, I mean, I just think that piece, and again, like that's, I think, the piece that sometimes we don't want to get into, right? Because it's easy to feel shame we've made mistakes, or it's easy to be afraid to be held accountable. And that's real, and that's okay. But also, it's still worth doing, you know. And it's for me like very much something I see as a work in progress. There's still a lot of room for improvement. I'm a lot better than I was, but I would also like to improve a good deal more.
Oh, always a work in progress.
Right.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's great. That self-responsibility piece. Um, I had another thought and it's like left me. Maybe it'll come back here. But I know that you did a bit of preparation for this talk, and I didn't know if there was something I'd missed that you really wanted to share. Like, just give you the space here.
Thank you. That's really
Yeah.
sweet. No, I mean, I think we hit it all like eventually in a very different way than I wrote out the notes, right? Which is the fun part. But yeah, like I said, I think for me the biggest lesson I feel like I've come to understand is yes, that love is just what's around us. It's the state of the world, it's the state of the universe. Like, so for me, it's been about recognizing what's gotten in the way, what are the beliefs or the patterns that I have, to drop to drop all the like nonsense, right? Like all the nonsense that doesn't need to be there. And I think the more that I've been able to lean into connection to the world, the more that I'm able to see suffering in the world as, you know, not mine, like I'm not taking on someone else's suffering, but seeing things in the world that don't affect me, right? That don't directly, visibly sort of impact my life. For me, like I look at all of that as we're all still connected. And the more that I'm able to lean into those things, even when they're uncomfortable, um, the more that I find I've also kind of cultivated more self-love in the meantime. And it's not to say like, I'm not trying to say give a damn about other people because it's good for you, right? That's not what I mean, because I think that that's sort of saviorism, right? And that's not what I'm advocating at all. But I
And
do think,
a lot of people go there because we're conditioned, like, this is what you do if you're
right,
good.
right.
Yeah.
And especially when you have white privilege, right? And when you have like a certain educational background and all that stuff. So I want to be like really, really explicit that I want to be aware of that. But more in the sense that, like when I was thinking about this conversation, what I realized is as I have become more aware and had more and more of a social conscience and tried to just advocate for compassion for everybody, what that's done is that is one more thing that's pulling me out of the paradigms that I think are so toxic. And sort of the side effect is I'm more pulled out of those paradigms. And then when I'm reflecting on myself, I'm not coming from a place like so deeply embedded in those beliefs. Does that make sense?
It does. I have a question because like
Yeah.
I'm a sensitive, like I have my own process with this, but like for the
Yeah.
other sensitives out there, which I'm sure you're in, I'm like, you know, looking at like a homeless person, like somebody that's clearly struggling and
Right.
like, and as an empath, like, and not taking that on, you know, that pain and suffering and still being in like your own bubble, so to speak, but yet being compassionate and present. It's like, how do you, what do you do personally to kind of, tough question.
It is. And I mean, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for going there, you know. For me, I the way that I navigate that now, you know, which is not to say it's the best way and I'm going to be the same indefinitely, you know, I'm never going to change, but the way that I navigate that now is I don't let any single interaction define my attitudes or my beliefs, right? Like I cannot save everybody. Like so much of the suffering that we see in the world is from systemic things. And I'm one person. I can't change the system, right? I can advocate and encourage people to all chip in. And I think when everybody does chip in, that is how things change. Um, but I really look at it as what are the ways that I can show up and just do the best I can. And the best I can doesn't mean that I can help every single person, you know, like I used to, like when I started living and kind of at the time I was working and like going on the highways in Atlanta, and there are certain spots where there are a lot of homeless people out like asking for money or whatever. And so what I started doing was having like singles in my wallet and like snacks in my car, you know, and I'm one person, like I can't, you know, and some people might say that that's bypassing and that's not doing enough. And I mean, and not to say that there aren't other things that I do, right? But when you're asking about just sort of in single interactions, you know, like that is what I tried to do. And sometimes I've run out and I don't have anything to give people. um, but I also think the compassion piece can go both directions there too, of like compassion for me of like I'm trying, and I'm not perfect and I'm not a savior. And yeah, and it's hard sometimes because I can look at myself and feel like I'm very well resourced, and I'm somebody who always wants to question like have I done enough, could I do more, could I do something better. But ultimately all of these things can get taken too far, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can make myself too responsible and slide into like I'm a savior and I need to help everybody. I can slide into I can't do anything and therefore I don't care, right? Like it's a dance, and it's in like all these different dimensions. Um and we all just get to be there with ourselves, right? And have compassion and meet ourselves where we are.
Yeah. Coming back to just being real with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, how the bypassing piece, what no, what exactly is that? How do you define it?
How do I define bypassing?
Yeah, like in that context that you were just talking about.
In the sense of like I'm one person and I can't do anything, like it doesn't
Well,
matter.
the example I heard and it, it was you know, like you're giving like snacks and dollar bills to people and there was this comment of like, well, somebody might define that as bypassing. So what does that mean exactly?
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
like in the sense, you know, I think that there's a lot of criticism for people with the kinds of privilege that you and I have.
Yeah.
And I think that that's valid. Like I'm here to learn, I'm here to be accountable, I'm here to, you know, I'm here for all of that. And so I think that there are people who could look at me and just say like, well, you're not doing enough, right? And so
Ah,
I do not want
ah,
to bypass into like I could be doing more and that could lead to one extreme, or I don't need to do anything, right? That there are all these different ways we can sort of bypass into like justifying
okay.
certain attitudes, right? And for me it's just the willingness to question myself, right? um that, I mean, we can't please everybody, you know, there's always going to be people out in the world who are just like, you're not doing enough, you're a terrible person, you know, it is what it is.
And it always comes back to yourself.
Right. But,
Yeah.
you know, I think that, you know, self-love is also being in integrity, right? With your own beliefs, with your own ways of seeing the world. And they are what they are. And there's no magical formula that's going to satisfy everybody, you know, like it's impossible.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And again, it just comes back to like, honoring and validating yourself in a way that, not sort of, it's these things are hard to talk about. It's not like I'm a complete a-hole and I don't even, I don't do anything with the homeless. It's like, it's no, it's like, what's for me, the way I take it in that example is like, what's real for me, like where am I at, am I able to contribute, help, give a smile if that's all I can give, or just say, I hope your day gets better. So no, that's a big thing with homeless is they're just not even seen. And
Yeah.
and then being okay with that, like if I have that dollar, that food to give, or if that's all I have is eye contact and recognition, like that's, and being at peace and honor and respect of like that's what I had to give. Like that was my truth for that day. And so is what I'm taking away, from this exchange.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I just look at it and again, like this goes back to my ideas of love. It's like doing what I can, doing what's in my capacity to do, whether it's, you know, in the conversations I have with people about issues, whether it's how I show up to someone directly who needs support. I mean, it's just there's so many ways to show up, and I really see all of those as our capacity to express love and our capacity to, you know, cultivate it and share it. You
I
show
love that. I love, yeah, like pointing out all the different ways we can show up and like being
Yeah.
open. We started this conversation with just being open and curious.
Mm-hmm.
I so you had mentioned loving kindness meditation. I've actually done it, so I know what it is, and maybe
Uh-huh.
people don't. And I don't. If you would like to share, maybe even lead a little short one, if you don't mind being put on the spot. Um,
I I'm flattered you asked. And I think in the spirit of what feels an integrity for me, I don't want to lead it so much as share a little bit maybe and encourage people to
sure.
seek out a qualified teacher.
Okay,
Um,
that sounds great.
because
Is an
because
example of you honoring where you're
y-
at. Yeah.
yeah, and also because I think, you know, I look at I look at the world and social media and the internet and all the amazing things and access that we have from that. And I also recognize that I have white privilege. I recognize that it's very easy to kind of latch on to, like, I am not an influencer. I don't aspire to be. I'm like barely on social media, but I don't want to sort of be an example of a white person teaching people about meditation when that's, you know, like I think there are much better people for that. And I would rather encourage people to seek out those teachers, many of whom are like in the indigenous traditions that these came from, rather than listening to me. Um, I mean, I do at times. I have led these sorts of meditations, but it's in a very different context, and you know, I don't
Sure,
get
for
into all
sure.
that. But I will say, loving kindness meditation. The reason it's been so profound for me is because part of what you do is, you know, think about love and compassion for people you care about, which for most of us is, I think, pretty easy, relatively speaking. And then it becomes this extension of bringing it to strangers, which for some people is not as easy, and then bringing it to people you maybe don't like very much, or bringing it to people you actively dislike, um, and also bringing it into yourself, which depending on the person might be easier, more difficult, or wherever it is in that sort of spectrum of effort. So yeah, I think for me, what I've learned from it, what it's really helped me have like build the capacity for, is that love isn't about choosing myself and people I love and then leaving everybody out. That it's really about this all-inclusive, unconditional compassion and loving kindness, and being able to navigate that, because I think, again, we were talking before about kind of the Western, this like often very binary thinking of like in or out, love or hate, good or bad, villain or victim, like there are all these ways that we create separation that I think is artificial oftentimes. And so for me, loving kindness meditation has been this really profound practice to welcome all of that and see how it can all be together and not actually be contradictory. And it's way too profound for me to like encapsulate that in a nice, beautiful way, the way like brilliant meditation teachers do. But it's really helped me come to a place of loving the people I don't like, which honestly for me has been another really profound way that I have cultivated more self-love, is I don't feel any restrictions to it. Because if I can extend love to people I don't like, then like there's no reason to hold back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but just to clarify, it doesn't mean you're inviting people you don't like to your wedding and your birthdays and things
Absolutely
like that.
not. No, it's like that's what's so amazing. It's like I love you and also I don't like you. Like I have boundaries and I still love you. Like it's amazing. And when I was a kid, I just thought like, I remember when I first started hearing that, like when I first started learning about like Buddhism and meditation, and I was just like, this doesn't make sense to me, right? Like it was so illogical. And now I find the opposite is true, that this like binary thinking of like it's love or hate and that's it feels very illogical. So all that to say, there are loads of amazing loving kindness meditation teachers in the world, and go find some.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's really lovely to have you as a guest, and
Thanks for having me.
and you do like personal development. Like, what all do you do? Like, you do a lot of things.
I'm one of those people who's complicated. I do a lot of different things, and the easiest way to find out about most of it is through my website that you'll have, but it's siderialchemy.co. And I help people plan rituals. I work with people one-on-one. I teach classes about intuition. So I'm just kind of out in the virtual world, not much on social media. And yeah, I love helping people grow their consciousness, to feel more seen, to feel more embodied, and to show up in the world.
And you're an amazing writer. You have a blog, as I recall. So if
I
people
used
want
to, and I'm working on something that'll be out in the world in the next few months. I'm saying it publicly, which means I have to follow through now.
we have like this huge backlog of writing. So like you may not be active right now, but you have been very active. Yeah. And your writing is amazing. So I highly recommend it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I will send you, I might even ask you to read a rough draft very soon then. So just don't be surprised. That shows up in your inbox.
All right, Stephanie. Well, I'm just gonna close the recording, and thank you so much for everybody for joining us.